In this video, we will cover trigger reactions in GroKit Core. Trigger reactions can be used for many different purposes, but to start, we're going to cover how to use them to react to correct or incorrect choices. First, we'll go to our GroBlocks menu and add an item ID trigger to the scene in order to use a trigger reaction to react. We first need to have the initial trigger. Once that's added to the scene, make note that the Use Trigger Reaction box is checked on the item ID trigger component. Also, make note that the accepted item ID is currently set to any. In order to test this properly, we'll set this to something like correct. In order to cause this item ID trigger to fire events, we're going to add a debug grab with item ID to the scene. Now that this is in the scene, we can take a look at the item ID in this case. If we set this item ID to the same tag as our item ID trigger, it will cause events to fire. In addition, it will use our trigger reaction component to fire as correct. If we set this tag to something other than what we set our item ID trigger to, it will cause our trigger reaction to fire as incorrect. Make note here that if we didn't have a trigger reaction on this object, setting the tag to match the item ID trigger would still cause normal triggers to occur. But setting it to a tag that doesn't match would cause no trigger to occur at all. See our triggers tutorial to see the basics of triggers in action. I'm going to set this tag to correct so that it matches. Now that we have our tag set up correctly, we can look at what will happen when we trigger a correct or incorrect reaction. Currently, our debug GroBlock has some events already slotted in. We can see that our events are referencing a visual object that has a material transition script on it, with some elements to change our object's color. What this means is if the trigger is correct, it will set this cube to green. If it's incorrect, it will set the cube to red. And when we exit the trigger, it'll set the color back to white. Let's test this now. So as our trigger enters, we can see it turns green, and as it exits, it turns white. If I set the item ID to something else like incorrect, now it should turn red. As long as this item ID doesn't match our item ID trigger tag, it will turn red. And if it does match, it will turn green. Those are the basics of trigger reactions. Check out the rest of the GroKit Core tutorials to learn more.